With any piece of software and any project in general, once you've done what you set out to do, the question is, can you keep adding value for your users, or have you just jumped the shark? Well, Dorico 5 is here, and hopefully we'll be able to answer that question. Space and stage are two new closely related areas in Dorico 5, and they are found here in the mixer. So you can see we've got live stage and live space. They're also available under the play menu where we've got stage templates and space templates. So let's just take a look. Now here I've got an arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner, and at the moment everything is set up as it would be by default if you hadn't paid any attention to this in a previous version of Dorico. And as you can see here, we have a stereo representation of the stage. So all of our instruments are pretty much placed centrally and in the middle, front to rear. That may well be the default that you end up with. It's a bit messy, but we're going to take a look at how you can change that. Now, the first way is to load up a template, which is often what you'll be working with, particularly if you start a new project in Dorico 5. So if we go to the play menu and let's look at stage templates. So if we load up one of these, so for instance, if we load up a big band one, so we're going to click that, click apply and close. You can see that all of these take positions, which would make sense in the context of a big band. And if we had more instruments, they would also be present. If we load up one of the others, such as a brass band, you'll see we get quite a different result. Probably less what we want in this particular case, etc. And you can see there's a few to play around with, hopefully, which will be good starting points. Let's just try orchestra in this particular case, and then we can see we get something else. So let's use this as a starting point. Now, what is handy about this is you can just pick these up and drag them about. So you can move them anywhere you want. And you may be thinking, well, what are they doing? Well, the first thing you may have noticed is that the pan position is changing. So this is actually quite a nice way of representing what's going on in terms of pan. So if you look at the tuba here, as I move it, you can see that's changing. If I put it centrally, it's changed to that. And if I move it all the way over to the left, we get that. So initially, you might think, well, this is just a pan control, but there's more to it than that. And that's what we're going to look at with the space. So space is the flip side of this coin, effectively. So let's just close that for the moment. And this is a live space. So what this is here is this is a way of setting your soundstage in terms of, in this case, reverb. So we can move it to the rear and we will get reverb. So at this point, if we move it all the way to the rear, your reverb send will be at 6 dB, the maximum. And if you move it all the way to the front, the near send will be the same reverb, but with no reverb send. So if we make those movements again with the mixer open, so if I just open up the mixer, and then let's just see sends here. So you can see the reverb sends. And if we open that up, if you keep an eye on the trombone, which is this one here, so as I move that towards the back of the stage, you can see the reverb has gone up. If I move it towards the front of the stage, the reverb has gone down. So this allows you to control reverb in this dimension and pan in this dimension, but pretty intuitively. And what's also nice is you've got this ability to move the players away. So if we have none of them selected, they will all move away, or you can select a couple of them and maybe move them nearer. But you've got nice editing here, and this is doing something which, if you're doing it manually, takes a fair bit of effort, and it's probably not going to be as accurate as doing it this way, let's be honest. So this is something I'd quite like to have available by default in Cubase, because you could do some creative things. Now, you're not just stuck to one particular reverb. So let's say we take advantage of another new feature of Dorico 5, which is the fact that you can add effects channels, which hasn't been the case up until now. So let's add another reverb. And let's call this, let's put in a reverence. This is one area where it's slightly more long-winded, but I guess most people who are using Dorico probably won't have a ridiculous amount of effects like I've got. And let's put this on Japanese concert hall, which is what the other one is on. So we've got that there, and then we're just going to EQ it. So this is going to be our far send. So this will be our far reverb. And then we're going to EQ it so it's not just got that, but also it's a bit duller. So I'm going to turn on band 4 in this case. So we'll turn on the EQ, turn on band 4, set it somewhere near the top, and then just bring that down a few dB. So this is going to be a duller effect like that. And now what you can do is look at live space, and we can say our far send is going to be our far reverb. So now it will go between the two. So with our far send, it will be far reverb. With our near send, it will be near reverb. And we're going to make that a lower amount. It's going to go between the two as we move it. So let's now just look at the sends part of things, and we can see that those have been done. And now just check that's okay. So yeah, far reverb and reverb. And now as we move this, you can see that the near reverb is decreasing and the far reverb is increasing, and vice versa as I bring this trombone down. And obviously you would juggle this around maybe in terms of levels. So we'd probably have our near reverb would be a bit lower, but this gives you quite a bit of flexibility, and you've got more control in some ways than you have in some DAWs, certainly in terms of immediacy and being able to alter this quickly. You've got access to some templates, as we saw earlier on. So we've got stage templates. You can also save what you've got. So for instance, here we could save this, edit a stage template, and then we can say Star Spangled. Let's just call it that. And that's there, etc. Typical Dorico management. So we can see factory ones have this little factory icon, etc. And pretty much the same goes for space templates, although it's a little more problematic. There isn't currently a button to create that. So you typically will create a duplicate of an existing one and then edit that and then save that, etc. That would instead be done from here. So you can do save as new space template. So you don't get to do it from scratch there. You can do it from here. So it's a slightly different workflow. They're considering whether or not to actually change that, which I think would be nice just to make it a bit more consistent, because you might be in that window and then go, oh, I need to go back to this other window, etc. So let's just save that, and let's call that to reverbs. And that'll do. And then that will then appear, as you'd expect, in here and be available to other projects, etc. So this is quite a nice touch, say, particularly because this is aimed at people who aren't going to want to spend weeks doing this kind of programming. You're going to want to set your players in a space, maybe alter the live space sound itself, change the reverb levels, move them around, and be done with it. And this will give you a reasonable facsimile. It's not as involved as some other solutions, but it's not designed to be. This is designed to be something which is quick and easy. And actually, as I've said to the Dorico development team, I wish this was in Cubase, as there are a couple of other things that they've come up with which I wish were there, because this could work really nicely and creatively. And I appreciate you can do this kind of thing in different ways, but this display here and being able to move everybody in or out, I think is a really great thing, because it replaces a lot of manual editing. So I think that's a nice feature. It's not totally finished, say there's some of the things in terms of the workflow possibly will hopefully be improved in the future, but it's certainly a nice touch and one that I've enjoyed playing around with. One of the other features of Dorico, which is aimed at making your performances more human without you having to spend a long time editing MIDI data, etc., is that it is possible to change the humanization of it. So under playback options and dynamics, you will see there's an option of humanize, which is this use pitch contour emphasis. So what this is supposed to do is to look at the way that the playing is happening and then to mimic what's happening with a human player. Anyone who's looked at this in any detail will know that humans do not play everything exactly as written. We don't play in a perfectly mathematically divided grid. There's some randomness in there. There's emphasis, which we may not even be aware of, etc. And this is an attempt to mimic this. Now, this will be turned on by default in new Dorico 5 projects, but in old ones, it will be turned off, so it won't affect playback. My experience of this is it doesn't make an enormous difference. It certainly hasn't made a negative difference on anything that I've been experimenting with, but it doesn't make an enormous difference. Now, I've actually done a mix down of this piece of music twice, with it turned on and with it turned off. And we're just going to swap over to Cubase to have a look and hopefully listen to the difference between the two. So on screen, you can see the two mix downs of that same piece with pitch contour emphasis on and with it turned off. Now, if I play them back, I'll be honest, I don't think you'll hear a great difference between the two. It's certainly not a drastic difference on this particular piece. I've seen some examples of others where maybe it's having too much of an effect, etc., but it is something you can either turn down or turn off, depending on what you want to do. But if we listen to these two together, what I've done is I've inverted the phase of this second one, so we only hear the difference between the two. So while we may not know which one the difference is on, if you play this back, most of the time it's quite quiet, but occasionally you can hear, like there, you can hear the odd piano note which sticks out. So certainly this is doing something, because if you do these mix downs with them both set to the same, they come out exactly the same. It's only showing us the difference between the two. So there's some differences happening in the violin, and there's the occasional quite large difference that's happening in the piano. So this is certainly doing something. Certainly when I listen to this one, I would say on the face of it, I'm certainly not offended by it. So I don't think it's doing anything that I don't like. I'm yet to hear an example where I think, yeah, that's made a massive difference to me, but I've not had enough time with this to find a really killer example that I could play you to show you that. But certainly my experience of the things that I've done with it, it's not done anything negative, and it probably seems to have done something positive. But because it's not a drastic effect, I may also be kidding myself. I'm fully aware of that. Dorico now includes Groove Agent SE, which will give you improved drum playback, as you might imagine. After all, it is a drum synth. It's something that you may well have had if you've got Cubase already, but if you haven't, it will be a nice addition. There are a few provisos though. The first thing is, if you are going to use it, you need to use the right playback template. Otherwise, certainly at the time of me recording this, there's a few weird little things which are undesirable and seem to be mostly completely obviated by using the right playback template. So go to Playback template, and instead of just picking the default one, which is Halion Sonic SE, and Halion Symphonic Orchestra, we're going to go with GASE, Groove Agent SE as well. So you've got that either for Elements or Pro. I'm on Pro, so I'm going to do that. Going to apply and close, and that means that the drum set will naturally be played back by Groove Agent. So if we go to the play window, once my computer catches up, we can see that we're Groove Agent SE and the drum set is rooted to it. That's already good. If we open this up, we see the probably familiar to you Groove Agent set up, and it's set in this case on Life is Simple. So we've got a few nice kits with a few mappings, etc. But there's a few other things which are useful in here. So let's just take a look at a couple of features. The first thing is Groove Agent SE includes quite a few patterns, and these generally are nicely programmed. There's a video on Groove Agent elsewhere in the channel, so if you want to take a deeper look at its features, then feel free to do so. But it's got some nice drum patterns, etc. The kind of things that if you're not a drummer, maybe they will help you out, either with ideas or with providing something which is useful. And we're going to look at how you can trigger these in a bit. But you can drag and drop from these pads directly into Dorico. So let's take this main one. In fact, we'll take the intro and then we'll take main one. So just going to click and drag that. I'm going to drag it onto here, and you can see those notes have appeared. And let's just drag main one on there. And that all gets put across, and if we go into right, we will see they will be appropriately notated and will play back. Okay, so if you don't do the playback template, this will be a mess, but also you have problems with dragging, etc. if you change your instrument and so on. But that will now play back as you would expect. Now, sometimes it can lose a bit in translation. But generally works quite nicely. So this is one of those features which I think is pretty nice because it gives you access instantly to some nicely programmed drum grooves, which will be hopefully appropriately notated, etc. But there's more to it than that. You can also use Dorico to trigger these notes manually from within Dorico. So previously, it wasn't possible to have any MIDI note exist which wasn't going to be notated. You can now do this. So you can create these MIDI trigger zones. So what we're going to do is look here, and let's say we want to trigger fill 7, which is B0. So what we're going to do at bar 6, we're going to trigger a B0, and let's just see how long it is. It's just 1 bar long. So we're just going to do 1 bar in this particular case. Oh no, let's go crazy. Let's do it 2. We'll do 2 bars of that fill because we've got a drummer who's a massive, massive egotist. Imagine that. So let's go back to right. And at bar 6, we're going to click on that, and then we're going to use the shortcut, which is Shift and 0, or the right-hand bracket. And then we put in the note we want. And in this case, it's B0. Now, there is another caveat here before we put this in. Actually, we're just going to go and look, and that's the preference. So you need to set preferences appropriately. If you're using a lot of these instruments, you need to change under general, you need to change the middle C note to C3. Otherwise, you get an octave offset. So if it's on C4, which is the default, you'll get something that's an octave out, which you can take into account, but it's just easier just to get it right. So we're just going to do that. You would need to set that. So back here, with the popover, I'm going to do B0. And then at this bar, that will get triggered. So if we go and have a look at Groove Agent, so we'll play that back. So you see that, hopefully you saw that get triggered there. So it triggered this pad at that point. So that's quite nice having that ability, because you can just trigger all these kind of things if you've got anything sample based, whether it's drums or guitar, those kind of libraries that you use. If you need to set a velocity, it's pretty easy. You just put it in brackets after the note. So if we wanted that to be 80, we could just set that B0 80, and done. And away we go. And that will work absolutely fine. And it's really nice being able to do this because there's lots of things with samples which are available, which you may want for your performance. You may want to just give a drummer an idea without having to notate everything. And this makes this all integrate pretty seamlessly in with your normal scoring workflow. As you can imagine, these can be made longer, shorter, etc. They do all the normal editing of this kind of event. So pretty straightforward. Another nice touch, particularly if you're working on larger monitors, etc., is that you can turn off whether or not Dorico follows the playhead. So here on screen, it's a bit cramped because I'm working on a MacBook with a reduced area, so it fits on screen. I've got a project open in 2 windows, so it's the same project, and we can turn it off individually. So let's say we want the score to stay still for whatever reason. So we want to stay on this while this is playing. So normally, the normal course of events, if we play this, what will happen is Dorico will follow that, and then we get this, and then it jumps to another page, etc. Particularly because obviously the layout is not very nice. Instead of that, what we can do is just turn off follow playhead on this one. So this one still has it active, so this will follow it, this will not. So if I hit play on obviously either of these windows, so you'll see in the lower part of the screen, just stay still. So for whatever reason, if you don't like it dragging off in the way that it does, particularly depending on what you've got on screen, you can stay in place and edit that or just look at it, etc., to your heart's content while the rest of it plays on. Again, nothing massive, but it's a nice little touch which makes it much easier to work, particularly, say, if you're working on multiple windows on a larger project on a larger screen, which unfortunately my screen capture isn't. Scrub playback has been added, which, if you use the DAW, is probably something you've used certainly some of the time. And one thing that I've always found slightly awkward, and this is totally down to me in Dorico, is that I may be in a certain part of the score and want to play something back repeatedly, and it's not really set up for that kind of thing. So this is certainly going to be something that I find pretty useful because I can listen to the same bit that I've got wrong over and over again and improve it, which is nice. So we've got two ways of accessing this. You can either do it with the scrub playback button here, or there's a keyboard shortcut which toggles it on. So you hold it down and then it stays. And as soon as you let go, it turns off, which I think if you get used to using it, probably is going to be the way that you're going to want to go. But I'm actually going to turn it on here to save me having to hold the keys down. And then, as you can hear, as the speakery icon moves across the music, and if you want to hold a particular thing, you just hover there and that does it. If you want to hear a particular instrument, you just hold down the shift key. So you can hear what that particular instrument is doing. And then I can just turn that off, and handily you can turn it off with the keyboard shortcut, which is useful. So again, this is only a small change, but it's one that certainly I'll find pretty useful, because often you may need to refine the harmony of a particular section, and just being able to do that nice and quickly like that is going to be useful. And also picking out which particular instrument is troubling you is much easier done by that, by this means, than any other, which again, these are all small little changes, but they're the kind of things that just make you like using an application a bit better. And I think that seems to be what this particular release of Dorico is about. As you're probably aware, if you use Dorico, it's got a fairly extensive range of instruments available, but there is now an instrument editor. So if you want to create something custom, you have the ability to do that. Now, this is one of the areas which certainly I feel from what I've been doing that it's a work in progress, and there's going to be more changes happening to this in the future. And there's a few little sharp edges to catch yourself on, but it's under library and instruments. And here you can see all the instruments. So let's just look for something to make a basis on. So for instance, let's go crazy and create a 9-string electric guitar. So we'll just use this here, and then we're going to build off of that. So new instrument from this particular selection. There we go. So we've got the copy there. So we're going to call it a 9-string electric guitar, because I've lost my mind, and one day I will learn to play the 9-string electric guitar that I bought. And then let's edit the strings and tunings. So we're going to add a couple of notes below. Now, in this case, it's not actually a 0 at the bottom of my particular instrument, because it needs to be more challenging than that. So we're going to have we've got low B, and then we're going to add a couple of strings below. So let's add another one. And let's put that down to F sharp. And then let's add another one and put that down to C sharp, because everybody likes a challenge. So there's the 9-string electric guitar, and we can edit the name here. So let's call that electric guitar brackets 9, because that sounds cool, doesn't it? So there's our electric guitar 9, etc. Number of staff lines, etc. All the rest of that looks pretty sensible, I think. And there we go. So now that should be good to go. And then let's try and put that into a new project. So there we can see it appears. Let's add that. And then we can see our tab appears once we set the options appropriately. And you can see we've got our 9-string tab ready for our crazy experiment. So that just means I don't have to go through the slightly laborious change of setting that up every time I want to create that. But obviously, if you've got any unusual instruments, you'll be able to do that, set them up, and away you go. Previously, for perfectly good reasons, Dorico has eschewed editing with the mouse because it's easy to get unpredictable results. It's very easy to end up inserting notes, dragging things to the wrong place, etc., particularly if you're working quite quickly. However, they appear to have come up with a fairly sensible compromise to allowing you to do this in Dorico 5. So now if I click, for instance, this note, if I drag it up and down, I can drag it to a new position, and it's within the range of notes of the instrument in question. I can also drag it sideways, depending on the grid that I've got set, to change its timing. So we can see this is working pretty much as we would expect. In addition to that, you can also create new elements with the mouse. So for instance, if we wanted to add a dynamic, previously we would have probably added it with the popover, etc., but you can actually just click, and then you can see now the mouse cursor is loaded in this case with them. And at the moment, I've got the option turned on to allow me to do multiple settings, so you can decide whether or not to do this. So it could just go back to the normal mode after a single click, but this allows you to add them wherever, and then you can go back to the normal mode just by hitting escape, and then the arrow is back to doing what it was. Now, this seems to be a sensible compromise between making it totally mouse driven, which I'm not a huge fan of, and giving you some flexibility to use it without giving you a foot gun with which you can regularly blow your own feet off. Anyone who's played around with music-based fonts any time in the past will know they haven't really followed any kind of standard, and you can't generally use them in different programs. Fortunately, a standard is really appearing, which is being adopted by a number of programs, and as a result, Dorico now has multiple fonts, which you can see the effect of on screen. So this gives you a few more options if you want to play around with your music and make it look a particular way, which, again, having this included effectively at no cost is pretty good. Most of these are open source. Most of them you could install yourself, but in many cases, either you need to install an application or they can be a bit awkward, particularly installing it so it works in all situations. So it's nice to have all of this covered for you and have access to them. An important thing to mention is that the restrictions on the lesser versions of Dorico have actually been loosened quite considerably. So Dorico Elements, which previously was limited to 24 players, is now unlimited, and Dorico SE, which is the free version, is limited to 8 players instead of 2. So you'll probably find that in many cases, the lesser or even free version will be perfectly adequate for most of the things you need, and I think that's pretty generous. So one thing which is being tightened is that Dorico 5 will no longer run on Mac OS X14. This is because the application framework called Qt6, which is what Dorico is built in, no longer supports that. So unfortunately, if you have an older Mac, something which runs on that, then I'm afraid you are out of luck unless you take one of the many options to allow your Mac to install a later version of Mac OS. So there you go, that's my take on Dorico 5 and the things that have caught my eye. And that's part of this, that's what's caught my eye. There's a lot more to it than this. If you look at the release notes for Dorico, in fact, any edition of Dorico, you'll notice there's lots and lots of little tweaks which the team put in, even between small versions. They're not just fixing bugs, they're making things work better all the time. That's one of the reasons why Dorico has changed in the way that it has, and it's also why Dorico 4 didn't get a book, because by the time it was Dorico 4.3, it was significantly different because the team actually listened to feedback, which is unusual for software developers, and they implement that, and they're trying to make this work for their users. I think that's the core of what's happening here with Dorico 5. There's no big killer feature. It's not like one of those Leviathan ones where you go, well, this is the reason why I got that. With the early versions of Dorico, it was the fact that it worked at all. Dorico 3, for a lot of people, it was condensing, etc. For me, it was being able to use tablature. It suddenly became something I could use on a daily basis at the time. Dorico 4 was all about playback, so being able to tweak what was happening, and Dorico 5 is continuing that, but mostly in terms of what users would want, so they can work better, quicker, and really get what they want from the program. I think the other tweaks which are in there, particularly the space and stage kind of things, those are really useful because they allow, let's say, non-technical users, the people who are going to use Dorico, but who don't want to become production nerds and worrying about send levels and staging, etc. They're going to be able to do this in a really good visual manner. And this is something that actually I wish they could kind of backport to Cubase, because it works in a way that a lot of my productions actually do work. I just don't have that graphic editor and the ability to just move players in and out in the way that you can do here really quickly and easily. It's not perfect. Dorico is created by a small team. There's a few rough edges and a few little corners you can catch yourself on here and there, but generally by the end of the cycle, you'll think most of those things are going to have been worked out. They work to a tight schedule. They often do releases pretty quickly. And in fact, during the week of release, there have been 3 extra updates fixing things which have been reported sometimes only the day before. So they're really, really on it. This isn't a eulogy for Steinberg. I'm not paid by them. I happen to be a beta tester, which is why I've had the privilege of being able to get my hands on this early, but I don't get any money from Steinberg or anything like that. So this is, this is my free opinion of it. I think it is really good. It's definitely got a lot of capacity, which I don't need. And I think it's probably the case, I've said before, it's got the capacity you won't need either in some dimensions, but they're trying to make it so it can be all things to nearly everybody in terms of scoring. That means it's immensely powerful, but it also means it has a pretty steep learning curve in some ways, although they've tried to soften it as much as possible. But this is the reason why the PDF manual for Dorico 4.3 was 1,800 pages, and it's probably only going to get bigger. But once you get into it and you start thinking about things the way that they do, generally it will do what you want. And if it doesn't do what you want, there's probably a good reason for that. Certainly, I've not found anything in terms of my notation desires which I can't fulfill with it, and it can do all the things which I need, but I'm not notating middle-aged Gregorian nose flute music, etc. Although it probably can do that, to be fair. Anyway, as ever, I hope you found this video useful, and if you have, please comment, like, and even subscribe, and we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.